Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Smoke&Spirits. And the first episode we looked at Ardbeg Corey Vrecken. And Corey Vrecken just packs a heck of a punch, much like the natural phenomenon after which it's named, the Corey Vrecken whirlpool. It's heady, it's intense, it's turbulent. We talked about that long, peppery finish, and we were not disappointed. I was not disappointed. I'm going to go ahead and hazard a guess that you were not disappointed either. So tonight we're going to take a look at another well-known expression from the Ardbeg distillery called Uigeadail. And Uigeadail means dark and mysterious. And the expression is named for Loch Uigeadail, which is the body of water that the Ardbeg distillery uses in the production of its whiskey. So, before we sort of get into it, I sort of wanted to take a moment to take a look at the color of this particular dram as it compares to the Corey Vrecken there. And I will sort of provide a more close-up shot for you here. But I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the maturation process as it relates to Corey Vrecken versus Uigeadail, because I've never had Uigeadail before, and I'm quite excited to dive right into this glass and tell you what I think about it. And if you're out there, you're probably rubbing your hands together with glee, waiting for me to totally be blown away by the Ardbeg Uigeadail. But one thing that you'll notice when I show you sort of this close-up shot, I've got two little Glencairns over here. I've got the Corey Vrecken on the right, and I've got the Uigeadail there on the left. There's a slight reddish hue to the Uigeadail, and you'll see this sort of reddish hue in other expressions from other distilleries. So one of them, to me, that sort of exemplifies that particular concept would be the Loch Lomond 12 year. And if you haven't had the opportunity to try that one, we're going to feature that on an upcoming episode. But that one really is reddish, and it's just a sort of a really complex, really interesting color just to look at. And you may be wondering sort of why that is. And if you're a veteran and if you've done tons of reading and lots of research on this, for a lot of people that are into Scotch, it's a labor of love, and it's a hobby, and it's a passion. And you probably know what I'm going to say. But for the Corey Vrecken, it's aged in first or second fill ex-bourbon barrels, and that's sort of a common thing with a lot of Scotches. And also French oak barrels, some of which are new French oak barrels. The difference with the Uigeadail is that it matures in sherry butts. And I'm going to allow you a moment here to just get the chuckles out. Sherry butts. What is the difference between a sherry butt or a French oak barrel? And when you sort of get into the reading here and you sort of start to look at this stuff, it can be a little bit confusing, I think, to say, well, you know, a barrel is a barrel is a barrel. Certainly they all share the same shape, but the difference between a barrel and a butt as it relates to maturing spirits is one of capacity. So a barrel's 200 liters and a butt is 500 liters. And you can see a little bit more of that reddish hue if you put more of this whiskey into your glass here. It may not be as obvious in the smaller ones. It's not a super pronounced reddish hue, and that's because, like I said, when you're talking about 200 liters versus 500 liters, in the 500 liters you may not sort of have that concentrated color because there's just more surface area for the whiskey to come into contact with. Okay. Another difference between the Corey Vrecken and the Uigeadail is the alcohol by volume. So Corey Vrecken just straight up punches you right in the face with that intensity and complexity of flavor at 57.1% alcohol by volume, whereas you've got the Uigeadail here, who's 54.2% alcohol by volume. So no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. You and I both know that in order to be called Scotch, it has to be aged for a minimum of 3 years. It has to have an alcohol by volume of at least 40% and come from Scotland. So just sort of above and beyond in terms of the alcohol by volume. So we're just going to sort of get right into this thing. I'm going to add a little bit of water. I think I mentioned this in my last episode here. I want to get the broadest possible experience. I want to get all the tasting notes that I can possibly get. And whether you're talking about 57.1% or 54.2%, that's pretty significant. And I just wouldn't want the ethanol to zap my taste buds into oblivion. So this is something that you can choose to do or not do, as is your want, okay? But I've chosen the Copita glass again, and this is something that I sort of keep coming back to because it's pretty great, okay? So it allows you to sort of tilt sideways here. You got the surface area, you've got all those great aromas sort of being funneled in toward your nose. And I'm gonna start from way up here, which I tend to do with a lot of the Islay single malts because they tend to be quite pungent, which is why a lot of us are attracted to these whiskeys. Okay, so when I start nosing up that high, I can expect to get some more delicate aromas, and what I get right off the bat is sweetness. And as I sort of move down a little bit, I move the glass up a little bit, whatever you want to do, it materializes into more of a caramel, a sweet sort of toffee. And certainly if you look at it, it's got this beautiful sort of amber color, like sort of the darker grades of honey out there. And when I look at this color, I'm actually reminded of some travels that I went on when I was a younger person, and I went to London, England. And I was a young person. I was below drinking age. But got into a pub, and they served me a pint of Guinness. And to a 17-year-old, this is probably the most striking illustration of how much volume a pint actually is, let me tell you. But the late afternoon sun was coming in through these beautiful amber panes of glass and striking the polished dark wood surfaces of the tables. And this is kind of what I see, and this is what I reminisce about when I see this color. And that's actually a really interesting point to talk about as well. So when it comes to what your experience is with your favorite spirit, nobody can tell you what is right and what is wrong. So when you're examining the color, when you're trying to pick up on those tasting notes, those aromas, it's a highly individualized, it's a highly personalized process. And this is why I would encourage anybody who's watching this or who's out there enjoying a new Scotch for the first time is just to sort of take your time with it, look at the color, really sort of sniff it and see what you can pick up before you just sort of dive right into it. So we have some light and delicate aromas coming from this glass. There's some sweetness, there's some caramel, there's some toffee, as the color would suggest. But what's really neat is as you sort of get closer, as you make your way down through, and I picture in my head almost like the strata, you make your way down through the strata and you get closer, your nose is almost right in the glass. I'm picking up sort of those bacon notes, which is kind of a weird thing, right? I think so. It's one of the things that's actually mentioned on the box, and they're not lying. See for yourself, see what your experience is. But I think once you get sort of right into it, it doesn't jump out at you, but it harmonizes really nicely with the sweeter odors that you pick up when you first start nosing. And I think probably the closest analogy that I can think of is a lazy Sunday breakfast where you've made yourself some pancakes, you're having bacon, you have a really good quality sort of maple syrup. I'm not suggesting that maple syrup is a nosing or a tasting note with Uigeadail, but it's the idea of the sweetness mixed in with the bacon, and it's just intoxicating is what it is. So as you sort of get in there, only then do you start to pick up a whiff of that smoke that a lot of the Islay single malts are known for. I'm not getting any hints of phenol, and for those of you that are not familiar with that terminology, Phenol is something that is characterized by almost like a sickly sweet tarry smell. So I'm not getting that from this dram. I'm not getting any tar at all, although I don't mind that. I love those phenolic notes in a lot of the other scotches that I enjoy, but it's just not present here for me. And the sweetness that I do get is not sickly sweet. It's not unpleasant. You've got some very definite base notes there of the raisins. Just sort of tying it all together. So almost like a motley assortment of aromas that just work really nicely together. So let's get into this. Oh boy. Okay, so you get way more of that bonfire smoke. I'm getting even a little bit of charred wood in there. And it's almost like a dry, like the mouthfeel itself is a little bit dry. It's not unpleasant. It doesn't sort of give you the cotton mouth, but it's dry for sure. But fairly clean. So not super long finish for me. Fairly clean. The bonfire, the charred wood, sort of that intensity is quick to fade, so it doesn't overstay its welcome, and you're left with a lingering, just a very slightly lingering sweetness, which is not unpleasant at all. It's not that sickly sweetness. I know some people out there, not even talking about Scotch, but talking about other spirits, they like that the Gewürztraminer, or the dessert wine, and I could never get into that stuff. Not a fan of ice wine either, for precisely that reason. I just think it's too sickly sweet. It's almost like drinking syrup as far as I'm concerned. But the sweetness that I'm getting from Uigeadail is it's a lingering, almost like a melancholy sweetness that just sort of hangs in there and is very slow to dissipate. And I apologize that I tend to wax poetic about my Scotch, but that's what it seems like to me anyway. Still dry with the second sip, but I find that having already sort of coated the inside of my mouth with the first sip there, it's not as explosive the second go around, and I imagine that's the case with a lot of the drams that you will have tried at this point. It tends to evolve, and it tends to, the nosing, the sort of the mouthfeel and the tasting notes will evolve as you make your way through the dram. And you should be open to that, because it's something that holds many surprises. And I don't profess to be an expert. I certainly am not an expert, but I am just a spectator who is very open to the experience of the evolution of a well-balanced dram. And certainly when it comes to Uigeadail, I mentioned earlier, I'd never tried it before tonight, but absolutely 10 out of 10, I would buy again. I would definitely enjoy again. If I were to pair food with this, I would probably include bacon, because honestly, it's not overpowering, but it makes its presence known, and it's sort of bookended for me in the flavor profile between that toffee sweetness, and you've got the bacon, and then you've got sort of the bonfire, that whiff of smoke, and then it comes full circle, and you've got the sort of the raisiny undertones there at the end. But to be perfectly honest with you, it's, as I sort of get into this, and as I take a little bit more from the glass, it kind of goes from being raisiny to really bringing to mind that sherry. And I am not a fan of sherry. I apologize. I can't do it. For me, sherry has also that sickly sweetness that I'm not fond of with the dessert wines and things like that. But like we said, sherry butts are involved in the maturation of Uigeadail, And you can sort of pick up on it a little bit the deeper you get into your glass. Not unpleasant. Like I said, it sort of tends to bring it full circle. You've got the sherry undertones bringing it full circle with those caramel top notes for me. You've got like a nice solid center of the bonfire, the smoke, the bacon. And it just leaves you with that sort of faint, dissipating, melancholy sweetness on your palate. So just tremendous. Anyway, so that's it. That's all I'm going to say. I probably bored you to death by now, but I do get quite passionate and quite poetic about Scotch. So won't you join me next time where we'll be paying a visit to Lagavulin? And there's a couple expressions there that I'd love to talk to you about. So I hope to see you back again for episode 3. Until then, stay thirsty.